بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. Welcome everyone again to another Project Ihya podcast. Alhamdulillah, we have a very important guest with us today, Mufti Dr. Yasir Nadeem Al-Wajidi. Sheikh, welcome to the podcast.
Jazakumullah khairan. Barakallah feekum.
Pleasure to have you.
Jazakumullah.
Mufti Dr. Yasir Nadeem Al-Wajidi is the founder and director of Darul Ulum Online. He is also the deputy editor of the monthly Urdu magazine Tarjuman-e-Deoband. Mufti Yasir Nadeem holds a PhD degree in the science of Hadith from the International Islamic University, a master's in Arabic language and literature from the American Open University. He has also completed the Ifta or Jurisprudence course from Darul Ulum Deoband in India in 2003, as well as holding a diploma in Arabic language and literature from Darul Ulum Deoband. He also completed the Alim course from Darul Ulum Deoband in 2001 with honors. Mufti Yasir Nadeem Sahab, he is the director and founder of Darul Ulum Online. He's a professor of Hadith and Fiqh at the Institute of Islamic Education, Elgin, Illinois. He is also the co-editor of Islamic Literature Review, which is an international journal of Islamic studies. And he's also the president of Prophet's Mission in New Delhi, India. Now, Mufti Sahab is most well known for his outspoken defense of traditional Islamic thought and regularly holds open debates online for anyone willing to engage in open and frank dialogue. This job of defending the traditional approach to Islamic sciences follows from a rich tradition found amongst the ulama from the time of the Salaf until now. It is no guarded secret that from the early days of Islam, in fact from the time of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, many people and ideas surfaced to challenge different aspects of the pristine teachings of Islam. From rationalists to extreme skeptics, from determinism to free will, a range of philosophical and pseudo-philosophical ideas and positions were tested against the firmly grounded and intellectually guarded lighthouse of Islam. This beacon of intellectual and spiritual light was guarded by ulama throughout history. The modern day, like every era before it, is also testing its hand and presenting its contribution to the legacy of largely subdued external threats to Islam. Today, inshallah, we will be discussing a range of modern framework, a range of issues from modern frameworks that seem to stand at odds with the traditional framework ulama across the world have held to, and which are often a point of contention and discomfort for or amongst ulama. We hope to benefit from the experience and knowledge of our guests in terms of gaining clarity in our modern age, which, if anything, is characterized by confusions, discomfiture, and uncertainty. Before we move on to our questions, I would also like to welcome Mufti Tufail once again, who is also now an integral part of the Project Ihya team. So before moving forward, Hafiz Musab, if you'd like to say anything.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. From my side also, I would love to welcome Mufti Yasir Nadeem, and thank you for gracing us with your time, your valuable time. And before we get into the questions, I'll just make one small request. If everybody can, drop a thumbs up and subscribe, inshallah. And I'll hand it back over to Mawlana Asadullah.
Inshallah, we're going to jump right into the first question. So the majority of contentions these days in our Muslim gatherings seem to always point back to a break between two viewpoints amongst the Muslims: those who consider themselves traditional and those who like to think of themselves as modernist. So first of all, what is a modernist?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. Jazakumullah khairan for having me on your podcast. It is an unfortunate state of the ummah that we want to achieve unity within our rows, but for some reason looks like it is from the taqween of Allah, from nizam taqween of Allah, that we have not been able to achieve it. We always have different sects, And this sectarianism is an issue. It's not a recent thing. It's been there since the very beginning of Islamic history. The earliest sect that emerged in our history, the first one, Khawarij, then Shia, and after that, Mu'tazila. Mu'tazila were believed to be the Modernists of their time. So my teacher, Hazrat Mufti Sa'id Palanpuri, rahimahullah, used to say that it's been the case in our history that once a fitna emerges, it never dies down completely. So Mu'tazila, though they don't exist anymore in the world, especially in the Islamic world, but some of their aqaid still are lingering, and some of the people in the Muslim world, they hold on to their aqaid. So if you ask this question, that what is modernism, or who is a modernist, especially in the context in which we're talking about. So the modernist in our context is a person who is reviving or working to revive the Mu'tazili position of the past. And when it comes to the Mu'tazili position, there were total 6 points. But the 6th point was that al-aqlu hakimun. That was the 6th point in the Mu'tazili fikr, Mu'tazili ideology. So if today someone thinks that aql should be given preference over naql, in the sense that if I see any contradiction between the two texts, between two ayat of the Quran, or between two ahadith, or between a hadith and an ayah of the Quran, then my aql, my reasoning should be the judge, and it should decide what I should accept and what I should reject. So if that is your method, that means you are reviving the Mu'tazili thought, and this point alone is sufficient for one to be classified as modernist in our time. On the basis of this, this aqidah that aql is superior than naql, you see people denying many of the established rulings in the Sharia. For example, they deny rajm, they deny
Just for the audience, I just want to clarify, naql meaning transmitted knowledge, like text.
Right.
Textual.
Sorry, yes, I should have explained that. So thank you for injecting that point. That's very important. So they deny the punishment of rajm. They also deny pretty much the entire criminal law of Islam, which consists of hudud and qisas. So they deny all of these things on the basis of al-aql, that aql or reasoning is superior than naql, which is the transmitted knowledge. So today, anyone who's doing it, he's a modernist.
And is there a sense that here they're only taking the position of the Mu'tazila, which kind of suits the norms of the day? Because there's other positions of the Mu'tazila which are rather extreme, which I think a lot of people, and they would be wary to hold to. For example, like if you commit one of the kaba'ir,
you're out.
You're out. So those kind of positions they would never go or gravitate towards. But it's only something that is kind of in line with what
that is correct. That is correct. So, for example, the official name of Mu'tazila, or they used to call themselves Ashabul Adli wa Tauheed. The reason why they would call themselves Ashabul Adli wa Tauheed, because Adl means they used to believe that we are the creator of our own actions, and Allah Azza wa Jal is the creator of His actions. And it's fair that Allah would judge us only if we violate His rights on the basis of creating actions that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and He prohibited us from creating such actions, and still we do it, then it will be fair that He judges us. So that's the definition of adl according to them. And Tauheed, they define Tauheed as they say that Allah Azza wa Jal does not have any sifat. He has names, but He does not have characteristics. So from this perspective, they call themselves Ashabul Adli wa Tawheed. So adl, now today, those who are reviving the Mu'tazili thought, they do not believe in that concept of adl, in that definition of Tawheed. They believe in characteristics of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Similarly, as you pointed out, they do not believe in their main aqidah, which later on became their identity, al-manzilatu bayna al-manzilatayn, which means that if a person commit a kabira sin, he will be out of the fold of Islam, but he will not be declared kafir because they believe in a position between the two positions, iman and kufr.
And I guess this is what kind of clouds there, or kind of makes it unclear to the commonly Muslim. And the commonly Muslim would think that no, these guys can't be Mu'tazila. They don't hold those famous positions of the Mu'tazila. But in reality, they've taken the effect of it, but they've left the aqidah aspect of it, even though it all comes back down to, or goes back to, their aqadi position.
I think also like there's a need to nuance our understanding of when we qualify them with the similarity with the Mu'tazila, that there's a difference between the theological and the legal, right? Like while modern day modernists will have modernist positions in fiqh, in legal positions, they will not necessarily, I mean, except maybe a very small minority of a fringe minority of academics, they don't really hold those theological positions. The other thing is also when we say about the Mu'tazila that they give preference to, aql over naql. This is also a position that was adopted by later Asha'ira as well, right? Like you have the example of Fakhruddin al-Razi and others that basically their idea was that if you have a contradiction between aql and naql, between reason and revelation, then you have to give preference to reason. And the reason for that is because you can't process revelation without reason. So I think this is a kind of rationalism that is acceptable. What the Mu'tazila have, like the problem with them, is hyper-rationalism.
I would like to add a point. I'm sorry. This position that is attributed to Asha'ira, that they also give preference to aql over naql, that's not right. It is not in that general or broad, context that every time there is a contradiction between aql and naql, they always give preference to aql. No, there are certain rules. And I think if you remember Hafiz Mus'ab and Maulana Abdullah, that was the center point of my talk when I visited Atlanta in your last retreat. So we talked about this. And I mentioned this point that if the aql is qat'i, definitive, and the naql is zanni, indefinitive, and then there is a contradiction, then in this particular case, aql will be given preference over naql. Otherwise, even Asha'ira, mutaqaddimin or mutaakhirin, they all believe that naql is rajih. An-naqlu fawqa al-aql. They all believe in this concept.
Yeah, so that's actually, I was going to mention that. Like the point I was making is that the Mu'tazila, what we can call them is, instead of rationalists, is hyper-rationalists. They basically give so much preference to rationalism that a lot of times it contradicts rationalism. That's the point that I was going to make, that some people will keep in mind the fact that Fakhruddin al-Razi writes a whole section on this, right? And that's the whole basis of.
Is it safe to say that the Ash'ari position is more that qat'i nusus, or qat'i, what we have from naql that is definitive, will never contradict aql? Not in the sense that we will give one preference over the other, but that they won't necessarily contradict each other.
Yeah,
that's the nuance between the Asha'ira and sort of the Mu'tazili position. Mu'tazili will say that even if it's qat'i and it's established qat'an from naql, we would still refute it based on some aqli,
or do ta'wil or something.
So that's right. So according to Asha'ira, if a naqli or textual reasoning, there's some background. Okay.
Yeah. Mufti, I think there's some background noise from you.
Yeah. So if the textual reasoning, which is in the Quran and the Sunnah, is definitively accurate in both qat'iyyud dalala and it is qat'iyyud thubut, then there will never be a contradiction, with aql. So yeah, this is their position.
So I think that the point that Mufti Tufail was making is that when we say Mu'tazila, probably better to use the term hyper-rationalists. And that kind of brings us to another point, that what would we call the modernists, like super hyper-rationalists, because they take it to another extreme in which they undermine even perhaps things that are mujma' alayh. and for the sake of, just common understanding and even modern day contemporary sort of values and knowledge. But that's going to come, inshallah, further on in the discussion.
Yeah, in epistemology, this discussion comes, all knowledge comes from reason. Plato explained that, and that's why he's classified as ultra rationalist. So it looks like Mu'tazila, they learned this principle from there.
Yeah, just so that people don't get the sense that the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah are against reason or rationality, but it's just that we temper it, and it's not left unbridled, and we don't throw away something that is established naqlan on a whim that it contradicts aql. Yes, we can say that perhaps our aql doesn't fully understand it or hasn't comprehended it, or there's something here that we haven't understood yet. But I guess the more extreme rationalists would say, no, just do away with the nas altogether. And we see that happening a lot.
Is it fair to say that we just use our aql to judge the epistemic worth of each dalil, and then let the dalail do the talking in a way? Like we'll say, for example, we'll rank the dalail, and then when there's if there is seeming ta'arud, then one will be given preference because of its epistemic weight.
No, it's not only at the time of contradiction they give preference to one text over the other in the light of their reasoning. It's not only at the time of contradiction. In fact, they deny certain nusus and certain text on the basis of their reasoning. So, for example, akhbarul ahad, khabrul wahid, hadith which is transmitted from one person to another, or from few individuals to other few, and that is not mashhur and that is not mutawatir. So that is khabrul wahid. So they deny the epistemic status of akhbarul ahad in aqaid and also in many fiqh rulings.
It's because they already have a conclusion that they're trying to project onto the Sharia, so they'll do whatever. Like their methodology will be based on that, that conclusion that they've started off with.
So it seems like they basically devalue the epistemic value of a sanad and all of the other aspects of a hadith, whereas Ahlul Sunnah, we would take all of that into consideration before making a hasty judgment on
whether... we can't say that they completely throw it away. They have obviously strange or more stringent characteristics for it, but otherwise they do accept sanad. They just have for example, they'll say that every tabaqa has to have two students from the previous narrator, right? So it's not that they're completely throwing it away. They're also not even throwing away khabrul wahid, but what they're doing is they're putting a shart that is very, very difficult to achieve and also unreasonable to ask for. For example, in any other given scenario in life, no one practically relies on two people at each level, right? Like, for example, if you hear that there's a storm in Atlanta, right? Like in some city in Atlanta, if one person tells you that, generally that's acceptable unless you have a reason to doubt it, right? So to apply that kind of epistemic constraint, that's something that is unreasonable. Their understanding was that this is what we do for a case of qada, right? You basically need two shahidin, you need two witnesses, so therefore we should apply that everywhere. But again, that's a misapplication.
Interesting. So should we move on to the next question?
Yeah.
So one of the starkest features of the modernist framework is its reinterpretation of scripture. Ulama see a problem in the way Quran and Hadith are reinterpreted by the modernist thought in light of contemporary values, knowledge, and norms. Can Mufti Sahib shed light on when and how these considerations are problematic?
Okay. Sheikh Sulaiman Al-Auda, Salman Al-Auda, he has a book, a very interesting book. It's called Hiwarun Hadi'un Ma'a Muhammad Al-Ghazali. So Muhammad Al-Ghazali is known to be one of the A'imma of the modernists in Egypt, especially in the field of fiqh and modern thought. So in his book, he mentions a few foundations, few characteristics of the modernist in our time. The first qaida, or the first foundation he mentions in the book, is that those people who can be classified as modernists today try to present the nusus and the text of the Sharia in a way that they become harmonious with modern science. So they try to synchronize between the modern science and the Quran and the Sunnah. So any such interpretation will be classified as a modern interpretation. Another foundation he mentions in his book is that reject the classical.
But if I may, before we move to the second one, somebody will ask that, is that problematic or is that not problematic? Or when is that problematic? When you try to marry science or bring the scripture sort of in line with it?
It is indeed problematic, and that is because science is ever changing and Quran and the Sunnah are not. Science is imperfect. In fact, a person who says that science is perfect is in itself unscientific. So when you say that we will have a synchronized interpretation, or we will try to establish harmony between the Quran and science, then it's not like you will such people will criticize science. They will accept science as it is. They will accept scientific theories as they are, but they will try to manipulate the ayat of the Quran and the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to establish that harmony. And then tomorrow, day after tomorrow, after a few years, that scientific theory will change, and then they will try another attempt to establish another scientific theory in the light of the Quran. So that is definitely a problematic position.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the first position, or first point. The second point, he mentions that classical interpretation of ayat of the Quran should be rejected because this classical interpretation was done by the Mufassirin who lived in their time. They're not in our time. So today we're living and we're experiencing explosion in the field of knowledge and science. So Quran demands reinterpretation, and again, that is very scientific position, and it is problematic, as I just mentioned. The third important feature.
I hate to break right when you're, but just to sort of bring in the question that would somebody who's watching this would have, they would have this notion that we've been told that the Quran is for all times. It's for the people of the past, for the present, and for the future. So where does this sense come from that we need to hold on to interpretations of the people of the past and sort of block ourselves from any sort of modern interpretations or interpretations that line up with sort of some of our current understandings? Isn't that in line with the idea that the Quran is for all times and for all ages?
Quran is definitely for all time, but at the same time, Quran establishes the need of sanad and the need of riwayah, the need of tawatur. So, meaning narration from one generation to another, transmission from one generation to another. So it is established by the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam itself. Now, when we say classical interpretation, we do not mean that every single mufassir who lived 500 years or 1000 years ago, if he gave an opinion, then his opinion is qat'i and definitive and we must agree with that. No, it does not mean that. There can be disagreement, but if all the classical mufassirin, for instance, agree on a certain point, it means there has been ijma formed on that position. Maybe not by all the mufassirin and by all the fuqaha and all the ulama, the position of the majority. And I don't understand why modernists they are triggered the moment you use the word jumhur. They believe in jumhuriya, but they don't believe in jumhur. Jumhuriya, by the way, is the is the Urdu principle. Exactly, is the Urdu word for a democracy. So they believe in democracy. They think that democracy is the best mode of governance, and not khilafa. So okay, we can talk about that in some other setup. But they believe in jumhuriya, but not jumhur. So when we use the word jumhur, it means majority of these scholars agree on this particular position. They say that, well, these are the scholars of the past. We are living in different time, and we have a right to reinterpret an ayah of the Quran. Yes.
So is there, like, for example, some ulama nowadays, sometimes they give tawjihad. Like ilm tawjih is one thing where so you'll hear tawjihad that are just based on new information that's coming out. They'll say this is a possible tawjih or that is a possible tawjih also. or this is a new understanding that, you know, the ayah could potentially be referring to. Is that problematic, or is that what you're talking about, or is that what we're talking about here, or is there
No.
a deeper distinction that needs to be made here?
No, there has to be a deeper distinction, of course. As I said earlier, that if a person is giving his own opinion, which is contradictory to the position of the Jumhur in the past, then such position, we have to be very careful about it.
So, for an example of something like that, just to make it clear for the audience, for the people, for the listeners, would be something like people arguing that the incident of Sayyidina Lut alayhi salatu wasalam and his people was not an incident, or was not an instance of homosexual behavior, but of homosexual sort of rape, or the like.
That's one example. Another example is from the masala of hudud and qisas. So the modernists believe that hudud and qisas, in this, the way how Islam or the Sharia or fiqh describes, that's not needed anymore, because the purpose of hudud and qisas was to control the crime. So if we have modern ways to control crimes in our time, we don't need hudud and qisas, because that's like cruelty according to them. So the not only Jumhur, but the ijma'i position of the Ummah in the past is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not give us an empty standard. He rather, it's like, giving an empty cup and you fill it whatever you like to fill it with. So that is like a liberal approach. So, for example, in liberalism, they have the principle of equality. They have a principle of freedom. So yeah, we agree with freedom. We agree with the concept of equality. But the biggest difference between liberal idea and Islamic idea is that in Islam you have a full cup of milk, and that's what you drink. In the liberal idea, you have an empty cup and you fill it with urine or with milk or with water or with whatever you like to fill it with. So that is a huge difference. So the concept of hudud and qisas, they were given to us by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with all the details, and we think that crimes can be controlled only by applying that method which was given to us by Rasulullah alaihi salatu wasallam.
Indeed, yeah, and even just the idea that it could be controlled by this or by that, those are all subjective opinions.
Yes, it is.
Weighed against something that's what we consider wahi or revelation. Go ahead, Musab.
Yeah, one question I had, right, like regarding what you mentioned about Mufassirun, all of them mentioning, or Jumhur mentioning something from the Mufassirin. What we hear a lot of times is them saying that in tafsir, a lot of things were just regurgitated and just copied from past books, and we see things like mindlessly being copied and just passed forward without much thought. And they may give examples of like for example, and maybe these are not good examples, or you can correct me on that, like for example that Ishaq alayhi salatu wasalam was the dhabih, or for example وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, that was Alexander the Great. So these things were passed on. Like one person, he did the tahqiq, the incorrect tahqiq, and then Mufassirun later they passed that on, but then somebody corrected it later on, showing that some Mufassirun did copy from before. That's the argument from their side.
I think these are all historical details, like who was Zulqarnain and who was Khadir alayhi salatu wasalam, a human or an angel, and all that. These are not the foundation of Islamic thought. Okay, so if Mufassirun were copying others, and someone later on came and corrected them, we can accept that correction because it's not going to change the reality. So doesn't matter Zulqarnain was Alexander or someone else. Zulqarnain actually went to Matli' al-Shams, and he went to Maghrib al-Shams, and he went to he established the wall. So we agree with the basic concept. Doesn't matter who Zulqarnain was. So it's completely a different story. When we say accepting the classical interpretation, we're talking about the concepts and not historical details.
Oh, so you're saying that Ijma is not considered like on every single thing. Ijma is only considered on the things that relate to deen.
And I think anybody who makes that sort of claim that they were just copying and pasting everything, I mean, that it means that they haven't, or it gives a sense that they probably haven't read properly, because
exactly.
They don't mention those things as definitive. They'll usually give several aqwal, especially the mufassirin.
Several aqwal, right.
They will never question the thawabit or the usul because those are well established, and I think that's what we're referring to. Things like Dhul Qarnayn and where's the cave of the Ashab al-Kahf and things like that. It's more that's more up to research and investigation.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to note that when we talk about their kind of rationalizing principles, and the fact that, as Mufti Sahib mentioned, like the idea of freedom or cruelty and so on and so forth, it's also very important for us to be skeptical and kind of question those principles to begin with, right? Like, for example, if they say that hudud are not needed because the larger goal of preventing any kind of crime that's already taken care of because hudud are cruel, I think it's also important for us to question whether it's truly cruel or not, right? Is the prison system more cruel, or is a had more cruel? Mullah Thanwi actually mentions in a few of his books, but specifically in Ashraf al-Jawab, he gives an example, that these people will complain about something like, if we can call it slavery. I think the word slavery is a terrible word for what the Muslims did, but if we can call it that, it's probably the most humane thing any army could have done, right? Like, you have a few options: either you kill all of the captives, which would have been truly cruel, right? It's a loss of life, and then or you can free them, which would have been just strategically a stupid move to make, or the third is you could keep them in prisons as we have today. But then you can see the harms of that, right? That basically the citizen, the taxpayer, has to spend on their livelihood, on their guards, electricity, and so on and so forth, and those people are completely useless from society. On the other hand, these people, which were considered slaves, they would actually be integrated into families. They would be educated. They would be, and many of them ended up becoming like qubad, judges. They had very noble positions. So it's a complete usage and benefiting from human life instead of completely wasting it. So I think it's very important. The same thing you can think about, the had of like cutting off hand, or even qisas and so on and so forth, or had zina. If you truly weigh out which one is more cruel, because the thing is, a lot of times what we do is we kind of cast aside the idea of cruelty, and we'll say like, no, let's argue this on usuli basis, which we should do. But it's also important for us to be skeptical of their terms, that they just throw in these kind of value judgments, but are they actually correct or not?
It's very subjective. Cruelty cannot be defined in an objective manner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
so you were mentioning that book. So the first point and the second point you were mentioning. Sorry, we kind of went off on a tangent.
Oh, no problem. So another point that he made was that according to Muhammad al-Ghazali and few others, and by the way, for Awam to understand, we're not talking about here Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah.
I was going to mention that as well.
Muhammad al-Ghazali is someone else. So he claims that for Muhammad al-Ghazali and his likes, they have a distinction between the ahadith. They have different classifications. For example, according to them, only mutawatir ahadith should be accepted. All the other ahadith should be rejected. And then sunnah is also divided into two parts. Sunnah tashri'iyya and sunnah ghair tashri'iyya. So sunnah that is a source of law and sunnah that is not the source of law. And then they would decide based on their aql which sunnah is a source of law and which one is not. Also, they deny the position of ijma'ul ummah, the consensus, and they say that ijma' never existed. It doesn't exist. It's not a source of sharia. But it's always whatever they like to do. So there was another person from the same camp. His name is Hassan al-Hanafi. So he says that, well, I agree with the four sources of sharia: Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, and Qiyas, but there should be the other way. Meaning, if you come across a masala, first you look into the Qiyas. So I want to do Ijtihaad first. So if after I'm done Ijtihaad, or I'm not able to do Ijtihaad, then I will look at the Ijma. If I did not find Ijma, then I will look at the Quran and Sunnah. So Quran and Sunnah will come all the way at the end. The first thing we should start off with Ijtihaad. So they just like to do whatever they want to do, whatever their aql, and in fact I would say whatever their desire guides them to. So that's modernism.
And I think that's very interesting point that's being made, because why do we call it a modernist? Is because in the modern world, the I guess the angle of thinking that people are, or the direction of thinking that people are tending towards, is more subjective, more individualistic, and that's what it's being applied to the objective Sharia and objective nusus, is that they're being pulled towards a more subjective directions, so that they can mean whatever
Yeah.
the person wants it to mean,
I think
and
more
that's
important,
basically what
like
modernism.
in terms of modernity, I think it's more importantly, it's important for us to kind of connect it with what it actually means. When we say modernity, this is kind of like a pseudonym that's been used for westernization.
Yeah,
We use these words like modernity, development, so on and so forth, right? Like which the
and they're
opposite of,
actually positive words, but
yeah, they're supposed to be positive, but they're loaded terms. Like
yeah.
it's loaded terms that at the end of the day just means westernization. If you look at people like Muhammad al-Ghazali, or even like Abdu, or Jamaluddin al-Afghani, and so on and so forth, there are direct connections between them and someone like Lord Cromer, who was colonizing Egypt, right? And he has writings in which he talks about basically changing the education system, doing reforms, what he called reforms at Al-Azhar University, and these people work directly with him on that. So I think it's very important for us to note the relationship between what we call modernity and colonization or westernization.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Inshallah.
and also technically, like if you just take the the literal meaning of modernist without tying it to this specific era, then every era had its modernists, and it could arise even from a non-individualistic society, right? You could have a collectivist society, for example, socialists, or nowadays, like anyone who's trying to make the status quo reconcile with Islam.
Yeah, I don't think in Islamic era we find this term modernism at any stage of our history. We certainly find the term tajdeed or ihya us-sunnah or tajdeed, which is the term is
Positive.
from the hadith of
It's a
Rasulullah,
positive term, right?
which is a positive term, which
It's a
means
project.
revive something,
Yeah.
right? But tajaddud it doesn't exist. Tajaddud is modernization.
Okay.
Mm. So I'm going to move on to the third question, just so that we don't go through all of our time on this one. So the attempt at reinterpretation leads modernists, or as we just discussed, more like Western thinking, Western thinking people into a clash with traditional schools of jurisprudence. This has led many Muslims to look down upon adherence to the traditionalist framework when it comes to jurisprudence. Why are the traditional schools of jurisprudence necessary for an authentic understanding of religion?
Yeah, the question is interesting because when we are saying that we need an authentic understanding of the religion, then authenticity will come only when there is tradition. It is not possible that you achieve authenticity and you decline tradition. For authenticity, you have to go back in time. As for modern approach is based on moral progress, and moral progress means that as we are moving ahead in time, we are getting better and better. Therefore, whatever people in the past in traditional time did, it was either immoral or they were just learning how to get better. Now, moral progress, this concept is wrong because it is purely dogmatic concept. When you say we are getting better and better, what guarantees that you will not be better further in the future if you go in time? And what is the dalil? What is the evidence that today you are in the best state and not in the worst? So it is purely dogmatic. There is no evidence. There is no support for this idea. So people who want to rely on non-traditional and modern interpretation of religion, they actually are infected by scientific ideology, and they're also infected by this moral progress concept, which is self-refuting.
Yeah, they're sort of conflating things, and I think it's contradictory because even if you ask them what was the golden era or what was the best time, they'll say, yeah, the time of the Prophet. They wouldn't.
Yeah,
I don't think, or no one in the right mind would necessarily argue that. But then they would contradict themselves in the next.
they're too afraid of the fatwa, you know.
Yeah.
I think also, like, if you look at why they have to do that, like, why is it so important for them to attack tradition? It goes back to the idea that if a foreign kind of force, right, uh, they interact with Muslims, they'll see that Muslims have their knowledge from grounded sources, right? And there's a whole, like, kind of linear tradition that is connected directly with us for it. And this is a point I mentioned at the liberalism conference when we had the panel discussion, that if you attack that's isnad first, then basically you can cut off that intermediary, that relationship that Muslims have with their
لَقَالَ مَنْ شَاءَ مَا شَاءَ.
ancestors. Exactly. And then also the second thing is that you'll also see them attacking the Sahaba a lot, right? Kind of trying to doubt their authenticity again. Same reason, right? Or Hadith, right? It's very important for them to attack Hadith again. Why? Or to raise doubts about it, about its preservation. Again, same reason, because if you can cut off that relationship that Muslims have to their sources of knowledge, then after that you can just say whatever you want. It's easy then at that point to claim, ijtihad, right?
Right. Muhammad Abduh's student, Sheikh Rashid Raza al-Masri, in his book has a whole chapter against the concept of adala of Sahaba, the credibility of the group of companions. So he said that this is not the right approach, that the entire group of Sahaba is believed to be credible, and without we don't do any investigation about them individually. So he has a whole chapter on it. Yeah.
So what do how do you respond when some people, they say, for example, okay, well, when he came to India, the ulama of Deoband, the ulama of Nadwa, they invited him and they gave him great respect, and this is how much love and adab they had with him. So we should disagree politely and kind of like this.
Yeah, actually, there are different stages of his life. In the earlier stage, when he was very close to Rashid, what's his name, Muhammad Abdu, he was a modernist. After his death, then the student, meaning Rashid Rada, became Salafi. So there are different stages of his life. Maybe it was in his last stage when he became Salafi. That's when he visited India.
Yeah,
And it is also possible. And it is also possible that the ulama over there were not aware of his thoughts.
yeah, I was just going to say that like
Right,
they
right.
judged him based on whatever they knew about.
Right. So a scholar came from Egypt, and we have to welcome him. We should welcome him because this is the akhlaq of Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. They had a gathering, and he was really impressed by that presentation.
Yeah, I think that's like what comes to my mind, especially, I was going to mention it, is that a lot of the problematic things sort of come to light after the fact.
Yeah.
And later on, I mean, there's still things people are learning it or bringing up things that they had said that weren't really hadn't become popular, even in our day and age when everybody's trying to look for things. So you can only imagine at that time information wasn't disseminated as quickly.
Plus, I don't think this was the manhaj of our ulama, that just because we disagree with someone, we were not going to welcome you at our institution. That was never the manhaj. For example, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad had ideological differences with the rest of the ulama of Deoband, and he was welcomed at Darul Deoband after India gained independence in 1947. So he came, I think, in 1950, I believe. So he was welcomed there. So Sayyid Ahmad Khan, who is the leader of modernism in India among Muslims, his son, I think his name was Nawab Aftab Khan or something. So he came to Deoband. In fact, he was the chief guest in one of the gatherings in Darul Deoband. So the manhaj of ulama is different than the manhaj of many ulama in our time.
Yeah,
I think that's also an important point that needs to be made. I think nowadays we've become very cutthroat.
Yeah, like how should we deal with or how should we our interactions be with modernists of today in the West?
See, our interaction, we have the usul from the Quran. Ta'alaw ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum. So I think we have a lot of so many things in common with these modernists than the disagreements. When The problem comes with our young scholars when they interact with the modernists. They tend to accept those modern views instead of having influence, positive influence on them. They become influenced by them, and that is a problem. So for instance, if you look at this incident in Darul Uloom Deoband when they welcomed Rashid Raza Misri. So Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah gave a speech, a lengthy speech. It was in Fasih Arabic. It was eloquently and badahatan. He gave that speech, and Rashid Raza was very impressed. So you don't see ulama of Deoband accepting Rashid Raza Misri's ideology. In fact, he was praising them after he went back to Egypt in his magazine Al-Manar.
Subhanallah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on to the fourth question, and that is that there are many tools used by the modernist trend in a problematic way, such that they have become ubiquitous in contemporary religious parlance. We would like Mufti Sahib to shed light on some of the major ones as follows. So I guess we'll try to just kind of go through these ideas. I listed several here. Inshallah, the other those of us here that want to add others, inshallah, we can just bring them up for the remaining time. So the first one is something that Mufti Sahib you touched on earlier, and that was the idea of ijma. So it is often targeted. They say that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he said that anyone who claims ijma is a liar, or that there is no ijma. They say this kind of rhetorically, that there's no ijma on the principle of ijma. So how would you respond to some of these sort of
I don't think
famous basically.
Okay, I don't think modernists have a better understanding of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal than Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi, rahimahullah. Being Hanbali and being the student of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, they have better understanding of what Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal meant by this qawl. So it's not like he never said that, he did. But what he meant...
About Shaykh al-Islam, Al-Ghumari wrote a risala that anyone who calls Ibn Taymiyyah Shaykh al-Islam is a kafir. There's a small response. I wanted to throw in the joke. Sorry,
Okay, so Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said that when Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah said that anyone who claims ijma, then he's lying, he actually he had a specific intention, which we can understand through other statements of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. What happened in his time when Imam Ahmad and his teacher Imam Shafi rahimahumullah would mention or mas'ala or extract a mas'ala from a hadith, some people would come and they say, oh, there is ijma against it. So they try to falsely use ijma against the nusus, against the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's why in that particular context, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah says that anyone who claims that there is ijma, he's lying. So we need to understand this qawl in that particular context. Another thing is that, when you're claiming ijma is istiqra'i. Istiqra'i means it's like based on induction. You need to know that these many scholars have given their opinion. And you know pretty much about all the scholars of all the major schools of thought, the main figures, that they have given their position. What happens usually in not everywhere, but some fuqaha, and precisely speaking, for Ibn Abdul Bar. Ibn Abdul Bar has one thing. Almost on every second, third masala, he says, wa alayhi ijma. So he claims ijma like, looks like that there is no ikhtilaf in the Sharia. Every masala is ijma'i. So some people, they loosely use this term ijma, and that should not be used like that. So based on istiqra, and istiqra means induction, and you need to have proper data about whenever you're making an inductive argument. So in that context, we need to understand the position of Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah.
And just the fact that even for many masail, Imam Ahmad himself rahimahullah, he used ijma.
He did.
Proof. He himself used it. And the fact that all of the Hanbali scholars, the usuliyun especially, when they would note down the usul of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they included ijma, so they would understand better what his position. I just mentioned this because I've heard it before.
The point that you're making about if you look basically holistically, right, and also the first point that Mufti Yasir made, if you look within the context, then you'll see the reality of the statement, right? I think this is a point that actually you can generalize about modernists, that they love cherry picking. Like this is something that you will see all over the place. So like for example, if it comes to like any masala, whether it's like, for example, they'll question, did the Prophet ﷺ have his own clothing, or was he wearing the clothing of his people, right? Then they'll cherry pick. They'll bring like one hadith that says, oh, he wore jubba rumiya, right? They won't look at the norm. They won't look at what do like 20 or 40 or 50 other hadith are saying. Rather, they'll say like, let me find that one hadith that suits this interpretation. Take any other mas'ala, really any other mas'ala of contention between traditionalists and modernists, and you will see that they have very like fictitious, very kind of fickle, like one hadith that's found in some random book, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, we have dalil for this. But if you look at what the majority of the hadith say, or what the majority of nusus say, is very contradictory. So actually this point about cherry picking, whether it's Imam Ahmad's qawl or the hadith of the Prophet,
another example of cherry picking is that they try to narrow down the area where the hadith can be applicable. So there is a rule in usul al-fiqh, and the rule is a very famous one: al-ibratu bi-umum al-lafz la bi-khusus al-sabab. So the modernists disagree with this principle. The reason is that if you have a textual reasoning, such as an ayah of the Quran, or mainly they apply this on the hadith. So suppose if you have a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the hadith had a specific background, because such and such event happened, that's why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made that statement. So the fuqaha will disconnect the hadith from that incident, and they will simply focus on the wordings, and they say that, look, from these wordings we can extract this ruling. So the modernists say that no, we cannot disconnect the hadith of Rasulullah from that particular incident. It has to be connected to that incident, and therefore the hadith is only applicable to that incident. We cannot extract ruling from the hadith. So they narrow down the scope of hadith so that they get rid of.
They want to look at the context there, but not
elsewhere. They want to look at the context there, so that they can get rid of more and more hadith, and they have fewer hadith in their hand to play around.
I think sometimes it always brings me back to, because I guess just from reading a lot of philosophy, it seems that our ulama, we try to universalize these principles from these ahadith, and what they're trying to do is keep them particular and specific to that incident.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting approach that they would just kind of try to make sure that there's no universalized principles that can bear on them.
I mean, the funny part is that if you were to truly apply that principle, then you can't take anything from the Prophet ﷺ,
exactly.
because all of it is contextualized, right, in his time.
And that's why they say that ahadith qawliya are not even hujjah. So if there are statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we will not take them. We will only take the ahadith fi'liya, meaning actions of Rasulullah alaihi salatu wasallam, because it is difficult to explain an action within a context. But qawl needs a context. A statement needs a context. So they say that actions can be used as an authority, but statements cannot be.
Which is also another fallacy, because same thing, like you can say the Prophet ﷺ did this because of the context of his time, right? He went for jihad because of the context of his time. So they'll apply that principle wherever it suits them also.
Yeah.
Very interesting. The second point I had written here was that, and this is something that was kind of touched on, was that sort of a solitary opinion remains a valid option for use based on time and circumstance. So kind of like we were just discussing, that in the Turath, there's some qawl there. So it's valid. We can take it as long as we find ourselves in a circumstance in which it just seems to be the most palatable one based on the norms or circumstances or the modern sort of culture that we're in. We can just take that solid. Yeah, yani the idea of muftabihi, or what is ajma alayhi, the fuqaha of that school, for example, they say no, we should kind of have this sort of intiqai approach where we just jump in and we should just choose based on sort of their own principles, which are basically ease.
So they do not like tradition, and they also want to rely on tradition. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, Imam Awza'i rahimahullah said that man akhadha binawadir al-ulama'i faqad halaka. So when you do cherry picking and you take one opinion, rare opinion of this scholar, one individual opinion of that scholar, for instance, Mufti Tufail? Mufti Tufail?
Yeah, I think he dropped off. Did he drop off?
Yeah, he'll probably be. He should be coming back.
Okay. Right. So he made a point earlier It was about in tafsir. Some Mufassirin mentioned that Zabihullah was Ishaq alayhi salatu wassalam. So he made that point earlier. So that this is the position of like some few scholars here and there. Imam Tabari rahimahullah in his tafsir mentions this position. Now there's a scholar of our time, he says that look, it is in our Turas, therefore we agree with Jews and Christians, and Ishaq was Zabihullah and Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam wasn't. Look, it is in Tafsir Tabari. So on one side you have a problem with tradition, and on the other side you want to rely on some traditional positions that have been rejected by the scholars of the tradition. So that is a paradox.
Yeah, and I guess that approach also kind of a person is claiming themselves a level of ijtihad like mutlaq. So when you are a mujtahid mutlaq in that sense, then what's the point of even looking into the opinions of others? Then you should just do your own jihad. Why do you need to support yourself with a fringe aqwal?
And this is the thing they say all the time, like we need to open the doors of ijtihad, like as if they'd been closed. But what they mean by that is, you know,
they want to break the door. They don't want to open the door. They want to break.
Let me through the door. That's all it is.
I think it's, we should actually discuss this in a little bit of depth, because a lot of people actually have this kind of misunderstanding, not only modernists but also the Salafiyya, right? So what is actually wrong with, if somebody says, you know what's wrong with doing ijtihad? There's no prohibition against it. What do you say?
Yeah, we don't say that there is anything wrong with doing ijtihad. I mean, ijtihad is permissible, and there are certain conditions you need to follow. As long as you follow those conditions, you can do ijtihad. I mean, you cannot do ijtihad against the Sharia. That's the problem with the modernists. Their ijtihad is against the Sharia, not within the parameters of the Sharia. For example, they would use masalih mursala, this terminology, or they would use Maqasid Al-Sharia, and they will cancel any nas whatever they want. So they will say, oh, it is against the maqasid of the Sharia. Maqsad of the Sharia is that Sharia wants to protect your mal, your wealth, and your honor, and your life, and your deen, and your reasoning. And then they will say, because this hadith and because that masala, speaking about hudud and qisas once again. So they say that if mal and one's life can be protected by other means, so why do we stick to hudud and qisas? So they use Maqasid Al-Sharia to cancel the concept of hudud and qisas in Islam. So their ijtihad is always against the Sharia. Obviously, this type of ijtihad was never permissible, neither today nor in the past.
Also, if
they do it
both of you, Mufti Sahab and Mufti Tufail Sahab, if you could kind of shed some light, and that's actually one of the next things that was on the idea of Maqasid Al-Sharia, because I think there's a nuanced understanding of what we mean when we say Maqasid Al-Sharia, and how it has just become sort of this 5-minute iftar course which people take nowadays, and they become muftis with the sort of they have the certificate of, now I know the 5 or 6 maqasid of Sharia, and I can sort of understand all of Sharia.
Like al-fiqh al-mu'asir, you know, these
al-fiqh al-fiqh al-maqasidi, actually they have there's a new fiqh, it's called al-fiqh al-maqasidi
as well.
As well, yes.
Yeah.
So now, if we could maybe spend a few minutes just sort of kind of like highlighting, where does the maqasid actually play a role, and where are they important, where are they not? You know, it's become sort of this one standard rule for everybody for some reason.
Because we hear Maqasid Al-Sharia even from our own ulama, the traditional ulama, and we hear it from them too. So sometimes it's like, okay, you know, is this a newer concept, the whole thing, or is it something that was shared and then there's like, it's like
granted, our ulama use it probably far less than.
I mean, also, like, I think the main thing to point out there about Maqasid Al-Sharia is that Maqasid Al-Sharia was never a framework to operate fiqh. It was always a framework, a post hoc explanation of fiqh, right?
Yes.
It's not. There's a difference between usul fiqh and Maqasid Al-Sharia, or like hikam, right? Hikam attempt to explain what the Sharia is attempting to do. It's not principles that govern fiqh, which is different than usul al-fiqh. That's the biggest fallacy that they commit, actually.
Right, so that they don't differentiate between hikmah and illah. So Maqasid Al-Sharia mainly they're about hikmah, the wisdom of a shari'i masala. And then they want to apply that wisdom, which we understand based on our own limited wisdom, to every scenario. Whereas illah is different. Illah is the actual cause of that fiqhi position which is mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Wow, that's a beautiful point, actually.
Yeah, I think the lines between illa, sabab, and all of these kind of things are just kind of glossed over in the discussion when people start thinking about Maqasid
I mean,
Al-Sharia.
I think that's the biggest unfortunate thing, right? The fact that people will throw out the idea of maqasid without like basic prerequisites, whether it's understanding the language properly, right? So basic language skills of
Right.
sarf and nahw and balagha, and they'll just throw in maqasid left, right, and center without knowing the difference between illa, sabab, and hikmah. They'll throw out these words.
This is what I was going to point out.
Did we lose Mufti Sahib here? Or?
To understand the difference between am I back?
Mufti,
Okay,
sorry
about that. So
we lost you for the last like 20 seconds.
Okay, so I was saying that in order to understand the difference between illa and sabab and shart and alama and all of these things and hikmah, you need to learn usul al-fiqh, right? This discussion exists in usul al-fiqh, and not like people sometimes, even our scholars, when they learn usul al-fiqh, they just read kitabullah and that's it. This is in like towards the end. You have to go all the way till the end in the book in Nur al-Anwar or Fasami or whatever. And the modernists do not like usul al-fiqh. They think that because usul al-fiqh will keep you in certain restrictions, in certain parameters, and we will not be able to do cherry picking, pick and choose. So let's just cancel usul al-fiqh. So obviously you have a problem with usul al-fiqh. You're not going to understand the difference. You will be confused between hikmah and illah, and there is a huge difference.
The other argument that they make to attack usul al-fiqh is that these are kind of like man-made principles, right? Which is also another like misunderstanding, because usul are actually derived from Quran and Sunnah, right? Like for example, the fact that yaqeen is not removed by doubt, right? This is something that is directly taken from a hadith in Tirmidhi. Otherwise, the rest of usul al-fiqh is just based on language, simple rules of language, right? Like connectors such as like fa and thumma and so on and so forth. It's very linguistic. So
yeah,
I mean, even like the dalala of the lafz, or the iqtida of the lafz, these are very linguistic issues. So these are not like things that are man-made. It's just norms that we employ in language. They do and we do and everyone does, right? So this is again another fallacy of calling something that is not actually man-made to call it man-made.
Also, if we can, because we've gone over the hour mark, but if we could touch on the idea of urf. A lot of times this is also thrown around.
And even in the last point, right, like with usul al-fiqh, from my experience, there are people from amongst them who are well versed in Arabic, and they actually love referring to usul. But the difference is that there are certain pet usul that they really like, so it just seems like there's certain usul that are very it allows them to paint things in it with a broad stroke, kind of
cherry picking.
Yeah. So urf is a very powerful tool of modernists, and they say that things change depending on where you live and which era you're living in. So they use the concept of urf from usul al-fiqh, where it is clearly stated urf is not hakim, it is mahkum, which means that you cannot use urf against the nusus. You cannot use against the ayat and the hadith and ijma. Yes, if you are in a situation where there is no ijma and you want to do ijtihaad and you want to do qiyas, then yes, you can utilize the concept of urf. Otherwise, you can't. But unfortunately, using this tool, they denied many ahkam of the Sharia. I've already mentioned one, which is hudud and qisas. I've mentioned rajm. They also denied the concept of khilafa in Islam, and they strongly advocate for democracy. They also denied the punishment of apostasy. They deny the concept of jizya. They also deny that jihad was offensive, and they believe that it was only for defensive purposes. They also claim that it is absolutely permissible to go against the Imam al-Muslimin, because you can, in democratic setup, you can do protests against the president or against the government. So similarly, you can do that in an Islamic government. They also deny hijab, and they say that hijab was only for a certain time when women would go out in Medina Munawwara, and some immoral people would try to harm them, and that's why Allah Azza wa Jal commanded those women to put the hijab on. We don't have that problem. I don't know who thinks that way, but we don't have that problem anymore. Therefore, no more hijab. Also, they would
another argument they use for hijab, which is the funniest thing I've ever heard. I've actually heard, unfortunately, a alim that has graduated from one of our institutes, who said that the slave women in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they didn't have to wear hijab because they used to be busy at work. Therefore, if there are women working in the workforce today, they also don't need to wear hijab.
He does not realize that he is equating women with slave girls.
Yeah.
I don't think feminists will like this argument, though he's serving that purpose, but they will be offended by this argument, and they should be.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's gone. This sort of urf has been used right to an extreme. For example, like when it comes to even the riba banking system, or I've heard it even used for whether a Muslim woman can marry a non-Muslim man.
Yes.
So this idea of the
And one other thing is that, when for a layperson, when he's engaging with a modernist, he may not be able to understand their usul because he's not familiar with usul al-fiqh. But when you lay it out the way you did, right, like all the masail that they have ikhtilaf with, then the usul suddenly becomes very manifest and clear, because it's like the ikhtilaf or the divergence is always on things that reconcile Islam with the Western worldview.
I think that's the biggest principle. Like, if you want to really know like who's a modernist and who's not, then look at the motive behind it. They say follow the money, but here you don't follow the money, follow the objective, basically. What's the goal, right? Is it that you're objectively looking at dalail and doing tahqiq and coming up with some new ijtihad? Or is it that you already have a position that if you're finding a lot of comfort in, you're finding it very westernized, and you're like, okay, we need to somehow suit the Sharia. Let me see what kind of explanations and evidences and dalail I can find to suit this. I think that's the biggest factor to look for.
And even like the same principles like you mentioned earlier, like for example, they could apply to safar, and they could say that, okay, we don't have to pray, we shouldn't pray qasr anymore because before in that, or for maybe in that time it used to be more
they'll never use it there. Huh?
They'll never use it there, right? Or for example, like okay, like we were talking about we talked about evolution, so mathna wa thulatha wa ruba', but Allah did not specifically negate more than 4. So they'll never like go the other way, but they'll always kind of err on the side that that works, in our status quo.
Right.
And I really wanted to bring some examples.
The main things that we've pointed out throughout the podcast, there's cherry picking. That's a very common trait, right? Finding positions that are suitable, to westernization, right? That's another thing. And also basically inconsistent application or illogical applications of principles. They'll like a principle in one place, but then not apply that the other way around, as you just pointed out.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, would you consider like all modernists in the current day the same, or would you classify them? Because certainly there are certain figureheads that are quite far off. They're very far off, and there's like you could even say there's doubt on there's doubt on their iman. But then there are certain modernists who are very who seem to be quite close, much closer to the tradition, at least from from a layperson's vantage point. And so what would you say? Like, would you classify them, or do you think they're all one? What would you say to that?
I'm sorry, my internet is acting up today. I don't know why. So I heard the question. You hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Do you hear me? Okay, all right. Yeah, so you were talking about if you were saying that if all the modernists are same, right? That was the khulasa of the question.
Yeah, would you?
Spectrum.
Is there a spectrum?
Some diseases are more serious, threatening than some other diseases. So you have to classify between cold and cancer. So there are some people who have attacked not only the usul al-fiqh but the entire turas. and they believe only that the Quran is the authority. So these people are classified as munkirul hadith, who deny the authority of the Sunnah. They're also modernists, and I think they are the worst in this spectrum. Then you have people who would say that we accept, we're not munkirul hadith. We don't want to be called munkirul hadith, but we have our own understanding of Sunnah. As I pointed out earlier, that Sunnah that is related to the action of Rasulullah SAW will be accepted. As for the Sunnah that is related to his statement will not be accepted. And it has to be mutawatir. And it has to be not only qat'i subut, it has to be qat'i dalala, meaning definitive in its indication to its meaning. So with all these conditions, then they would come number two. And I have to mention the name. Javed Ahmed Ghamidi is very popular in the subcontinent among Muslims, so especially in Pakistan. So he would fall here in this category. Then there will be some people who would say that no, hadith or hujjah, we can accept a hadith, but if hadith is contradictory to our aql or the urf, then we can have interpretation of the hadith, or we can look into it whether the hadith is hadith sometimes can be rejected and can be classified as da'if because it's contradictory to reasoning, or it's contradictory to the established facts of the Sharia. So these people would be classified as the third group, and there are a lot of people who represent this group, and people need to be careful. People need to be cautious when they are learning their deen. Unzuru amman ta'khuzuna dinakum. You better watch out whom you're taking your deen from.
So I think that's the perfect, tough question, right? Which is, who are the modernists in North America?
I thought we had a deal.
Let's not take any names, but I think
no, I mean, if you want, we can, but definitely your show.
Mm-hmm. No, I think we can take certain people, obviously, like who have gone off of the extreme end of that spectrum. So there is one question when it comes to the munkirin of hadith, for example. It was just something that came to my mind when you mentioned it, where the argument was made that the reason that person was saying that I reject hadith, and matter of fact, his name is also Jawed, but the last name is different. Hashmi, yeah. So he was saying that.
Had a debate with him.
Yeah, I think there was a debate between him and Brother Daniel Hakikaju.
Oh, that guy. Okay. I know what you're talking about. Right.
So he kind of falls in
a 6-hour debate, that like really long one.
Yeah,
it was a really long. Yeah, it was a really long one. But he made this point that the reason I reject a lot of these hadith is because. So he says I don't reject all of them, but I reject majority of them simply because when it comes to the first level of narrators, which is the Sahaba, he says there was no jarh and ta'dil done. I was just curious to hear how Mufti Sahab would respond to that statement, that there was no jarh and ta'dil done on Sahaba. So how could we ever know for a fact, or how could we know that what we're getting from them is accurate, or they were
No, I think jarh and ta'dil does not mean criticism only. Yeah. So because jarh goes with the ta'dil. When we say ilmul jarhi wa ta'dil, it means that it is a science that talks about declaring who is authentic and declaring who is not authentic and credible. So Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already declared their credibility by saying radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. So that is their ta'dil. So we don't need any jarh. The ta'dil has already been established. That's the usul. And it is, I think, a commonsensical usul that once the ta'dil or the credibility of an individual or of a group has been established, a higher authority than the lower authority cannot criticize. Indeed. The same group and the same person.
Yeah, it was just a very strange argument I heard, and I was just because a lot of people, a common person would get confused and say, yeah, you know what, we never hear about jarh and ta'dil on Sahaba.
Yeah, because Allah is saying radiyallahu anhu. If just a second, let me just complete one point. If Allah is saying radiyallahu anhu wa radu an, and you have hypothetically speaking Sahaba lying and fabricating things and committing sins all over the place without doing any tawbah, then what type of rida is this? I mean, if Allah has declared his rida for the Sahaba, it means that Allah knows that they did not lie. They conveyed the message the way how it was. That is their ta'dil.
Yeah, and also I was mentioning that in the genre of jarh and ta'dil, you do have like books on biographical evaluations of Sahaba. It's not that their names are not included, but like Mufti Yasir mentioned, that jarh also includes the fact that you're going to include ta'dil as well. and they're all people on whom ta'dil have been done. Number one, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also by their contemporaries and even people after them. Right? There's plenty of ta'dil that's done.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So
And had you had like a Sahabi, let's say hypothetically, had you had a Sahabi that made things up or had weak memory, you would have like tabi'un that would have said so, right? And you
well,
don't
they
find
say that there were Sahaba that committed sins and stuff like that. So why couldn't they perhaps lie also or something? They would. That's how they would retort.
No, I mean, this is just a guesswork. I mean, you need to prove that they or this Sahabi actually lied. You cannot just say they can. Yes, I mean, same can be said about Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. They were human. They had qudra on lying, but they didn't lie. So the same argument then some people would be making against Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam.
If I could, bring up one case study, just so we can kind of discuss the nuances of a particular example. So, with evolution, right? There's a lot of people who talk about like Adamic exceptionalism. So they're going to try to push it to its boundary, let's say, without doing ta'wil. So my question really is would this be considered kufr or not? Like, for example, if somebody says that, okay, Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was a miracle, he didn't have any parents, but to accommodate for genetic diversity, we can accept, and like keeping in view all the hadith, all the nusus, we can accept that the children of Adam alayhi salam, his sons only, right, that they could have mated with these other, humanoids or these other human-like creatures. They were not human, let's say, but they could have mated with them, and they were mateable, right? So this way, you can have a matrilineal line beyond Adam alayhi salam, but everybody's patrilineal lineage goes back to Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. This way, all the nusus are protected, but yet, like, okay, we've created this way for science to reconcile with
As a possibility or as a
just as a possibility. Like, if somebody says that this is a possibility, would this be
I won't call it kufr, but I think we have a right to demand a dalil on this possible approach. I mean, first they need to, beyond any doubt, establish the fact that before Homo sapiens there were Homo erectus and Homo habilis and others. So beyond any doubt, if they establish this, then we can discuss all these other possible approaches. But I mean, first of all, the whole concept of evolution is doubtful. I know a lot of people are not going to digest this, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ulama, they take this approach that, okay, forget evolution, whether it's right or wrong, but the fact that it can be, like, if this room is there, that it could be reconciled, then let us give people that room, just so that their iman is not in doubt. They don't feel like I'm becoming kafir, and they don't get in this tough space. That's what these kinds of scholars or people say.
That is a scientific approach, and we do not agree with that, because tomorrow, if modern science says that there is no, see, the reason why this modern approach is adopted, because there can be some genetic related issues, genetical related issues. So there's some genetical problems that brother and sister, they have to get married, and then it is possible that biologically it is not, they would not have healthy babies. So, but tomorrow science can prove that no, it is possible. Then what will you do in that case? Will you change your approach?
Well, I mean, if you kept it at the level of possibility,
part, right? I think that's the most important part. That, like, anybody who has doubts, let's say, about the Quran or in terms of their aqidah based on something like evolution, I think first of all it's important to convey the fact that the scientific method of following it, if a person follows the scientific method, they don't state these things as facts. The problem today is that a lot of people have taken theories as facts, right? And like anything that science has become like sam'an wa ta'at, and they just accept it blindly. So this is another case of blind faith. So I think that's the first.
They believe in taqleed of science.
Exactly. In other words, exactly.
Yeah.
Because there was one particular person who was pushing this, but he is actually, like, he understands philosophy of science, and he actually was only pushing this because he was only saying that, okay, this isn't kufr, and the ihtimal exists because the nusus don't negate this in a way which is qat'i. Therefore, we should
because
let
you're giving an opportunity, you're opening a door to reinterpret pretty much every nas where you find that this nas is clashing with a modern scientific approach. Then you're saying that, just like I did in terms of evolution, you can do that in other areas of the Sharia. So the deen has to be intact. Then we have to follow, certain rules and parameters. So we're not closing the door of ijtihad completely, but there have to be certain rules that you have to follow. Yeah.
So like,
but at the same time, I think this is also not like a Shari'i issue that will have an effect on like people's
it won't, yeah.
laws.
And that's why that's why we won't call it kufr. But again, this is not the ideal approach.
But
is there something to be said about? Sorry,
let me just complete this point. Like, if you're going to change the topic, but for example, Ya ayyuhan nasu taqu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahida, right? So here, Allah says that, okay, I created you from one soul. But their argument is Allah didn't say like khalaqakum min nafsin wahidatin faqat, or innama khalaqakum min nafsin wahida. Like, there's no hasr. So the possibility is that, okay, if Adam, yes, all of you are from Adam, therefore you're all from one soul.
Can you complete that ayah?
خلقكم من نفس واحدة فخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء.
Okay, so the ayah clears that doubt.
No, because they'll still say that that there's ihtimal that just because you all share, like for example, if you have a bunch of cousins and you say, okay, you're all children, you're all from one man. You can say that and still be correct, but it doesn't negate the fact that they have another ancestor. So if all of us
no, but if the Quran is saying وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً, so minhuma, the dhamir refers to Adam and Hawa.
Yes, and that would still be valid. But what they're saying is that the sons of Adam and Hawa, they mated with these other creatures, and then they had children through them too.
Or hin and bin, for example.
So it is, as I said earlier, that it is a possibility, but it is against the it would open the door of reinterpreting other ayat of the Quran, and that is not something that the ulama from the past till today traditionally approving it. And I'm not saying that that's why we're not calling it kufr. We're saying that it is not the ideal approach, but they need, before they adopt this approach, they need to prove that there were some other hominoids who existed before Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, beyond any doubt. All they have is fossil records, and is a scam.
Yeah.
So what would be so say for example a college student comes in and says that, what am I to think about sort of evolution when we have, as you mentioned, fossil records, or even sort of evidence or examples of these hunter-gatherer cultures and things like that from really long time ago, longer than what
natural selection is something that's constantly happening anyway.
Yeah, so something like that. So like the position on evolution, would it be, for example, outright negation? Would it be tawaqquf until more information becomes available? Would it be saying that, look, there's a possibility that we can, the one that Musab was mentioning, that it doesn't necessarily break down what we believe, even if
I don't think we have any issue accepting microevolution. As for macroevolution, then it has to be proven beyond any doubt. So that's the problem with modern science, that they don't prove anything beyond any doubt. They always say that, it is possible. So, and then tomorrow it may change. So in order to
be sort of like the best position to take, just say that we don't have anything to say about it. I mean, it is.
If you take the scholars of Kalam, if you look at the way they would apply, the kind of like metaphysical paradigms that existed in their time, what they would do is ride them on a hypothetical basis. Like they would say, if you consider these things right, like for example, someone could say like, okay, if you read something like Taftazani's Sharh on Al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya, he goes with the position of atomism, which like let's say has been disproved. But the biggest thing about Taftazani is he only rides on it hypothetically. He says according to your framework, right? For me, like I'm okay with just accepting sam'an wa ta'at, and if Allah says something, I'm okay with it. But if you're applying this paradigm, then we agree with this. And that's the biggest thing about the mutakallimun, that they were very careful and cautious in terms of epistemically how a thing weighs and how much they accept it. They're very cautious about that. So I think that would be the same thing you can apply here, right? You can say that, okay, if somebody says it's an ihtimal and it does not contradict the Quran and Sunnah, it's just an ihtimal. It's some kind of speculation, just like any other speculation. That's all it is.
Actually, that is a right approach. But the thing is that we need to be in a position of questioning the other side. We never raise our questions and we say, oh, looks like scientific community has already agreed with all the details, minor details and major details of evolution, and therefore now it is our turn to reconcile between that scientific data and the nusus. No, we need to be questioning them. So you have finalized this by now, or you have more to add in the future. So if they have more to add in the future and there are still some areas where they have no idea in terms of evolution, then we will ask them, okay, first you need to come up with the of evolution, and once that has become agreed upon in the scientific community, then you can come to us and we'll see. But
yeah,
there's no need
certain aspects of it are agreed upon. I think that they would venture to say that much, that there's aspects of it that are
microevolution is agreed upon. There's no problem.
Yeah, but isn't there aspects of macro that they would agree upon?
Like what?
I'm not sure.
The whole point of macroevolution is a species coming out of another.
Yeah, and that is not what agreed upon means, that there are people, scientific community, that say that speciation happened, right? But at the same time, and it happened because of on the basis of survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And but then there is another community, scientific community, that rejects that. For example, there is an organization, it's called it's in Washington, it's called Discovery Institute. So they have a list of scientists, and they have PhD in chemistry and biochemistry. These people outrightly reject evolution. So I don't think you can say that there is a ijma and consensus in the scientific community. Plus, the modern science and modern curriculum is highly influenced by the liberal and atheistic ideology. So it try to do a research against evolution. There will be no funding in any university. So it is fully controlled. So the other approach will never come out.
Yeah, I mean, and we're seeing that more and more and more nowadays, right? To the point that even a lot of scientists are finding it absurd, like on the whole gender theory, for example, right? Like, even I'm talking about non-Muslim, atheist scientists are finding this approach that we already have now given truths that you kind of agree on a metaphysical level that will let govern the idea of science. So it's becoming something, the control of information, the control of what is acceptable information and what is not acceptable information is not, unfortunately, it's not objective anymore.
For the audience, I would recommend a video. It's on YouTube, and it's documentary. It's about a case that was filed against a scientist. His name is Michael Behe. It's on if you write Michael Behe versus Pennsylvania court, so you will see the documentary. It's very interesting, and how the evolutionist community filed a case against Michael Behe, who was denying evolution and who had his own theory, and he convinced the local school board to allow his syllabus to be taught to the students along with evolution. So the entire evolution community, they were triggered by this approach, and they said, oh, if another approach is also taught to the students, then what's going to happen to our theory? So they filed the case, and he lost the case, by the way. That is because of the influence of media on the judge at that time. So I think it's worth watching if you have time.
Okay.
And also, like, there's for example, al-Isra wal-Mi'raj, subhanalladhi asra bi'abdihi. You can do ta'wil there, that this was spiritual, but like here we would say there's ijma al-Muslimin. But if, like, let's say somebody says that, okay, for evolution, definitely, no doubt, like what is zahir from that ayat is the fact that, okay, Allah subhanahu, like, none of this would come to the mind of a person, right? And I'm sure if you, before the theory of evolution became famous, if you asked any Muslim, they would just give the normal creationist story, just like any Christian would or anyone else would. So if somebody makes a claim, okay, there's ijma al-Muslimin on this, would that be a valid claim, or would this just be like a historical fact that the ijma is not mu'tabar on these kinds of things?
No. This is something, and I think we discussed this earlier, that this is a historical thing. Historical detail is not the subject matter of ijma. Okay. So there can be difference of opinion even in the past among scholars. So ijma happens on the fiqhi issues or on the fikri issues, and it's not related to any one of them.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight the principle that we mentioned before on an epistemic level. It's not just evolution, but if you look at many other things, for example, at the onset of the Big Bang, the idea is that you had a kind of expansion that happened, right? There was hydrogen, helium, and a bit of lithium. Now, if you had like a big question that can be asked is, how did it form from there to, like, trees and, like, the earth and, like, the different
biological life.
Yeah, biological life, or even forget biological life, even like rocks, different types of elements, like how from hydrogen and helium did you reach like this point, right? So then there's an elaborate story about how that happens. Okay, well, like they heat up and then fusion happens and like more elements are created and blah blah, and somehow, basically, in other words, we're made from stars, like me and you. Such elaborate forms are made from stars. Okay, let's say we go with all of this, right? Let's say we somehow accept all of this. The issue would be that from a kalam perspective, again, we only ride on these hypothetically, because epistemically these are only proven, let's say, from induction, from experiments, and these are not sources of al-ilm al-qat'i, right? And the asbab al-ilm, they're already laid out for us. Epistemologically, what we accept as sources of knowledge, that's already laid out for us. So if a person rides on some of these hypothetically, it's very important for us to be careful with these things, because again, some of these things can be disproven, and many of these things were disproven, right? Initially, you had the geocentric model, and then they switched from that to the heliocentric model, where you had the sun in the middle, and then now basically they have an idea that everything revolves around each other, like everything has an orbit of its own, which basically actually would correspond with the ayah kullun fi falakin yasbahun. But even in that case, if tomorrow that gets disproven, we're only writing them hypothetically, because they're not proven qat'an for us anyway.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, I think we've gone up to 1.5 hours. I know, Mufti Sahab, you're used to probably 2-3 hours.
3.5 hours easy.
Yeah. But so far, we've tried to keep our podcast relatively short.
Because I maxed out my time today, so I had a 3.5 hour stream in the morning. Ended after.
Maybe we can give Mufti Sahab some last words and then end on that, inshallah.
It was a great podcast, and I did not know that it existed. Inshallah, I'll see. Is it the first, or did you guys have podcasts before?
No, we had quite a few before. Yeah,
we've had a few before.
Okay. Yeah. So inshallah, I have to be
hope to bring you on more, inshallah. Jazakallah khair so much.
I will be your regular visitor, inshallah, on your channel there.
Inshallah.
Thank you
so much for having you.
Thank you very much.
Just a reminder to everyone else to just give a thumbs up and subscribe, inshallah, and inshallah I'll hand
share
it
the video, inshallah. I think today's conversation was I think maybe for some people it'll be eye-opening, and it's something that a lot of people probably need to hear. And inshallah, we hope it can garner further discussions on these important topics. I want to thank Mufti Sahab again, Jazakumullah khair, for joining us, and inshallah we hope to see everyone or have everyone as an audience next time. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.